You're watching The Legal Breakdown. Glenn, you and I have spoken at length about Lindsey Halligan, Donald Trump's improperly appointed attorney who was responsible for signing the documents that sought to indict James Comey and Letitia James. Her cases have now been dismissed, and she's been disqualified as a U.S. attorney. So the question then becomes, what about her law license? The fact that she was able to abuse her position like this, what would the implications be for her being able to retain her law license? We now have an update as far as that's concerned. Can you explain what just happened?
Yeah, Brian, I wish it was better news, because what we often talk about is how even in these days when the Department of Justice cannot be trusted to police its own misconduct by these, Pam Bondi and Donald Trump loyalists who are now the DOJ attorneys going into court and arguing in favor of Donald Trump's policies and positions. We're always talking about how there is at least the State Bar Council that will investigate allegations of misconduct, of ethical missteps, of outright lawlessness, of lying to judges. Well, not surprisingly, Lindsey Halligan was referred to her state bar. She is barred in the state of Virginia. That's where she's licensed to practice law. And a nonprofit called Campaign for Accountability, they filed a very detailed 17-page ethical complaint against Lindsey Halligan. They alleged and documented multiple instances of Halligan violating professional rules of ethics, Halligan violating Department of Justice policies, even Halligan violating federal law. And so, I was expecting to see the Virginia State Bar saying, my goodness, we need to initiate an investigation into these allegations to see whether Lindsey Halligan engaged in professional misconduct of one kind or another. But instead, Brian, what we got was a very short one-page statement reply issued by the Virginia State Bar saying that, well, you know what? If the judge finds that Lindsey Halligan made false statements to the court, then we can initiate an investigation. However, any allegations of violating DOJ policies, procedures, or protocol, any allegations of Lindsey Halligan violating federal law, those really are matters left to the Department of Justice and federal law enforcement. Which kind of begs the question, is Pam Bondi's Department of Justice, Pam Bondi, the one who put Lindsey Halligan in place as interim U.S. attorney unlawfully in violation of federal law? Is Pam Bondi's Department of Justice really going to take up a robust investigation of Halligan's potential misconduct? But wait, what about Kash Patel's FBI, law enforcement agency, for potential violations of federal law? I'm sure Kash Patel is going to get right on that investigation. But you know what? There are also watchdog organizations within the Department of Justice, like the Office of Professional Responsibility and the Ethics Office. But guess what? The head of each of those two offices was fired by Lindsey Halligan. So it really is, borderline frivolous for a state bar to issue a one-paragraph reply that says, no, this is really best left to the Department of Justice and federal law enforcement agencies. To this old career prosecutor, Brian, that feels like we're just sort of slouching toward the end of accountability for DOJ attorney misconduct entirely.
Can you talk a little bit about previous instances or the precedent that had been set prior that would negate what we're seeing right now? Like, in a situation like this, is it standard? Is it the standard that a bar would just kind of defer to a judge or the DOJ to do a job that I think most of us out here on the outside would assume would be the bar's responsibility to uphold?
Yeah, so one thing I'll say is when there is pending litigation, interestingly, there is no pending litigation now in the James Comey case and the Letitia James case. And those are the two cases that formed the basis of the ethics complaint that was filed against Lindsey Halligan. There is no pending case. Now, they may try to rebring those cases. However, if there was still pending litigation, it wouldn't be out of the ordinary for a state bar association to say, you know what? we're going to let this litigation play out, and then when, the evidentiary dust settles, we will take up an ethics investigation if it's supported by the evidence. So that's not unusual. But, I think what we have, Brian, is state bar organizations who are entirely responsible for policing the ethics of their own lawyers who are barred to practice law in each of those respective states. They usually care deeply about the ethics of the lawyers who are licensed to practice law, and they will launch prompt ethics investigations, even if they have to sort of stay them for a period of time while litigation unfolds in court. But they're ignoring the reality that right now we do not have legitimate leadership at either the Department of Justice or at the FBI, and we certainly don't have a law-abiding president. This administration seems to be allergic to the rule of law, and you would think state bar organizations would recognize that and would appropriately step into the breach. But let me add a little insult to injury. The most recent reporting, Brian, is that the Florida State Bar, where Pam Bondi holds her license to practice law, has received more than 1,400 ethics complaints against Pam Bondi. And similarly to Virginia, the Florida State Bar said, you know what? We're not going to investigate these while she's Attorney General. Brian, when is there a more important time to investigate misconduct by an Attorney General than when she is serving as Attorney General? I understand the friction between federal government and state governments. I understand the reluctance of state bar associations taking on big federal fish like Pam Bondi. But you know what? Nobody said enforcing the rules of ethics for the lawyers who are licensed to practice in your state. Nobody said it was going to be easy. Nobody said it was going to be fun. But it's never been more important. And it seems like at least some state bars are falling down on the job. I will hasten to add, Brian, that in all of the 50 states and the District of Columbia, each state, each jurisdiction has its own rules, regulations, procedures, protocol about how they will initiate or decline to initiate ethics investigations. And they're all different. So it seems to me right now, the Virginia State Bar and the Florida State Bar are not rising to meet the urgency of the moment.
Glenn, I think it's clear that there are going to be people within these organizations who are barred in Virginia, in Florida, wherever it may be, who are obviously going to see this and who are going to bristle because these are some pretty plain abuses that are happening in plain sight. And those abuses are validated by virtue of these attorneys being barred by these organizations. And so what recourse is there within these organizations, or is there none? Is it just the command structure makes their determination and the rest of the organization's members just have to, sit idly by while the Lindsey Halligans of the world really sully their good name because they're barred by the same org?
Brian, I'm going to say the recourse is not robust, but let's look to Florida as an example. When the Florida State Bar indicated it would not investigate these 1,400 ethics complaints regarding Pam Bondi while she is Attorney General, a watchdog group actually filed suit, and it worked its way up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court upheld that decision. They declined to sort of wade in to that morass. So, the recourse, as I say, is not robust, but let's never forget, and let's hold fast to the fact that other Trump-affiliated lawyers have been through the ethics investigation process, and many have been disbarred. Rudy Giuliani was disbarred twice over, once in D.C. and once in New York because he held law licenses from both jurisdictions. And Kenneth Chesbrough and John Eastman and other attorneys were sanctioned by their state bar. So one thing I'll say is these things often take a very long time to play out. I mean, I think it took maybe 3 or 4 years for the D.C. and the New York State Bar Associations to finally make their way through ethics investigations and disbar Rudy Giuliani. So I'm not saying Lindsey Halligan or Pam Bondi are out of the woods. I'm just saying that there is an urgency in this moment when lawlessness has become the norm at the Department of Justice. I would sure like to see the state bar organizations step up and begin to, care more about and protect the ethics of our practice.
Glenn, taking a 30,000-foot view here, can you talk about some reforms that, given your 30 years of experience as a federal prosecutor, that you think need to be made, perhaps with the state bars, but maybe just more broadly to solve some of these problems that we're seeing arise right now?
Yeah, Brian, it's a great question. So let's kind of completely pull back and talk about the problem that has been exposed during the Trump era, an era of lawlessness, specifically in our law enforcement agencies, the FBI and the Department of Justice. If every single component, every agency, every division, every section at DOJ, and of course FBI is a component within the Department of Justice, is steeped in politics, if, we can make every corner, every floor, every office of the Department of Justice beholden to the President of the United States rather than to the American people, this is a problem that will recur, right, over and over and over again. And there are ways to sort of guard against that. One of the ways is to have inspectors general. And of course, DOJ has a robust inspector general, IG office. Michael Horowitz was the inspector general for the Department of Justice for years and years, I believe until recently. And by statute, those agencies are supposed to be immune, shielded from politics. The problem is Donald Trump has run roughshod over the rule of law, specifically the rules designed to protect the independence of inspectors general, because inspectors general, Brian, are like our cops on the inside of government. They are watchdogs against executive branch fraud, waste, abuse, corruption, and crime. But if you neuter them and you convert them into just another political arm of the White House, then you have exactly what we are experiencing now. I think we need to shore up the protections and make these offices 100% independent, beyond the reach of the Oval Office. I would recommend going back to something like a full independent counsel's office before the independent counsel statute lapsed and we moved on to what's called special counsel. But special counsel still falls under the authority of who? The Attorney General. So if you got a Pam Bondi in the position of Attorney General, a special counsel is not going to be worth, the paper the appointment is written on. I believe, and I've advocated for this before, we need a 100% independent, apolitical, independent counsel office to be a watchguard, and that office needs to be completely above and beyond the reach of politics. So that is one, I think, fix that we need to consider. We need to work toward putting in place when the rule of law comes back into the light of day and we have moved, through this dark period of Donald Trump, dear leader.
Yeah, I think that's perfectly put. And I think it's important, too, not just to diagnose the problems, but to figure out some solutions for this stuff as well. So for those watching right now, if you'd like to follow along and support our work, the best way to do that is to subscribe to our channels. Great way to support us, independent media, and it is and always will be 100% free. So I'm going to put the links to both of our channels right here on the screen. Just go ahead and hit the subscribe buttons. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.